The Remedial Herstory Project is a nonprofit working to get women's history into the primary and secondary history curriculum. To help us meet our goal, we produce media, lesson plans, and so much more. You can check it out on our website, www.remedialherstory.com. Our project is funded through grants and by patrons, potentially like you.
Thank you to our patrons Jeff, Barbara, Christian, Kent, Jamie, Jenna, Nancy, Megan, Leah, Mark, Nicole, Anne, Sarah, Alicia, Katya, Michelle, Jessica, Laura, and Jackie.
If you would like to join these wonderful people and become a patron, you can head over to patreon.com and become a supporter of the Remedial Herstory Project. You too can help us reform education and allow women to be seen, heard, and complicated.
Hey, Kelsey.
Hey, Brooke.
Want to tell everyone what's happening in today's episode?
Today, we are going to be talking about the Statue of Freedom, which sits on top of the Capitol building in D.C.
Okay.
It's a statue of a woman.
What?
Yeah.
Hello, and welcome to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%, the podcast that explores what happened to the women in history class. Now, here's your host, Kelsey Brooke Eckert, and her partner in crime, Brooke Neva Sullivan.
In this episode, we are going to be asking the question, what is the lost history of the Statue of Freedom? And we are joined on this episode with Katya Miller, and I am so excited.
Yes.
This is a really cool topic because I knew that there was a statue there because I've been to the Capitol building and I've done the tour and I've seen all the introductory videos.
You've done the stuff.
But I didn't really think about why a statue of that?
Why this one?
Why a woman dressed that way with those interesting features? And
Can you describe the statue for many people who don't know what it looks like?
Yes, I can. It is a woman wearing these interesting robes. She has either a sword or a staff or something with us. Katya can tell us more.
Yep.
She's also wearing an interesting headdress. It's at the bottom. It says "E pluribus unum."
Oh.
How's your Latin?
Pretty solid, but that's also in Wizard of Oz.
It means out of many, one, and this is the motto of the United States. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a really meaning, it kind of reminds me of all for one and one for all, the Three Musketeers. But I think it's more out of many people, out of many states, we have formed this one
perfect
union. Yeah. Perfect. Well, question, but we have formed a union, and it is one.
There is one singular.
There is one. And so it's interesting because I know more about the history of Lady Liberty. I know about a bunch of the different monuments in DC. I am familiar with there's in history, we talk a lot about how women are used as symbols for Lady Justice. There's manifest destiny. And so it's interesting because this is a statue of a woman and I had no idea about her.
And sorry, what building is this atop?
This is on top of the Capitol building. Okay. So, Senate, House of Representatives. And I'm so excited about this topic because these symbols of the U.S. I think this would be a really great lesson to incorporate into an elementary school classroom, and to have students really analyze why this statue, why this woman, what does that mean, what is she representing?
Yeah, or even do a deeper dive on the artist. You could do this in an art class as well. Why women? Why art in this way? Why did they choose them for these moments? Because all of these things were commissioned by someone at some point to have built. So who did that?
Yeah.
What about that building?
I'm so excited. And Katya is going to give us all that background on this statue that many of us probably, if we did know that it was there, don't know the history of it. And if you're like me and we're yes, there is a statue there. Couldn't tell you what it looks like. Anyway,
don't quiz me on the statue.
Don't quiz me on the statues. I'm really excited for all of us to learn a little bit more because this is a really interesting and lost history.
Great. Let's get into it.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Katya Miller, and I'm a historian and author. And I have been researching the Statue of Freedom on top of the United States Capitol Dome for the last 25 years. I'd like to share with you this long forgotten story of America. In the middle of the Civil War, our country was very divided, similar to our present time. In 1863, the Statue of Freedom was quietly placed atop the U.S. Capitol dome as a symbol of unification and a sign that the Union would continue. Over time, her image has lost its importance, and she has become invisible. Now she's a woman hidden in plain sight. I had wondered who created her and how did they get her up on the top of the Capitol dome? Why wasn't she well known, like the Statue of Liberty and so many other symbols of our country? These were the questions I asked in 1993 when I found out about her. That was before I had a computer and was able to conduct internet research. And the complete story is barely there now. I first found out about her while I was reading a book about Native Americans' contribution to our country. And then in May of that same year, I saw her on the front page of our San Francisco Chronicle, being taken down to be refurbished after 130 years. It was then that I had an experience with her, which I'll tell you about later. Ever since that time, I felt that I needed to get people to see her. I thought I was an unlikely person to research her, as I was an artisan and metalsmith living in California and later New Mexico, while the statue was on the other side of the country in Washington, D.C. In order to find out more about her, every few years I traveled to the Capitol to meet with historians and the curator of art to ask questions. Now, after all these years, I've figured out many things about this very complicated woman. I was asked by the historian at the U.S. Capitol Historical Society to write an article for their Capitol Dome magazine. I wasn't a writer, but somehow I figured out how to organize many pieces of this puzzle and wrote what now has a very long title, first article called An Appreciation of Thomas Crawford's Statue of Freedom, a statue called America, Pocahontas, Liberty, and Freedom. It was very well received, and then 2 years later, they published my second article called Behold the Statue of Freedom, Sculptor Thomas Crawford, Senator Charles Sumner, and the Three Graces of Bond Street. And I included as much about the women in their lives as I possibly could. That would include Crawford's marriage to Louisa Ward, who was the sister of early women's rights advocate Julia Ward Howe, who many of you might have heard of. She wrote the famous Civil War anthem, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and the Mother's Day Proclamation, which was the inspiration for Mother's Day. Now, as I talk to you, you might want to look at images of the statue on my website, which is my name. It's www.katyamiller.com. It's KATYAMILLER. And you can download my 2 published articles and see many wonderful free videos. Now, I'd like to tell you about the 3 designs for the statue and 4 of her names. These evolved through letters of correspondence between the sculptor and 2 commissioners at the Capitol during the pre-Civil War period from 1855 to 1856. Crawford's first design was a line drawing of a balanced classical woman carrying a sword and shield in one hand and an Athenian olive branch in the other, a wreath on her head for victory, and he called this design Freedom Triumphant in War and Peace. In her second design, Jefferson Davis, who was one of the commissioners, wanted a warrior who could carry out the Manifest Destiny agenda and lead the country west to greatness, which they called From Sea to Shining Sea. This lady carried a sword in her right hand and a wreath and shield in the left, wearing a Phrygian cap on her head. Now, Davis rejected the Phrygian cap, declaring it was a symbol of slavery in the Old World and that Americans were born free. This version of the statue was called Armed Liberty. The third and final design was also called Armed Liberty until 1862, when the Department of Interior gave her an official name, which she still has today, which is the Statue of Freedom. Now here she became half Native American and half European American in order to make her uniquely American. It's here that the story became bigger than life to me. When I was on one of my visits to the curator's office, I found a line drawing that Harper's Weekly had made of her with a label, America, Apex of the Dome. This took me aback, so I made a copy of it and tucked it away in my files until I could figure out why they would name the statue America, which it turns out is a story that goes back 400 to 500 years. And why did her sculptor and one of the commissioners also call her America in letters of correspondence? The name America, the woman, kept popping up in my research, and I noticed it on other art at the Capitol, on frescoes and the bronze Senate entry door. And I was able to connect up many dots at this point. Now, as a grandmother, I was inspired to write a children's book for 6 to 8-year-olds. I wanted it to answer many questions clearly and simply about who's that lady on the Capitol Dome. The title of the book is I Am Lady Freedom, and I'd like to read you this short story now. I am Lady Freedom, the statue atop one of the most important buildings in the world, the Capitol of the United States of America in Washington, D.C. Look up at the big white dome to see me. I rise above all the other monuments and the cherry blossoms in the spring. When you see stories on the news, I am there in the distance. An architect drew up plans for a great building where the laws of the land would be made. He wanted to top this Capitol with a statue to remind people of their newfound freedoms. That statue was me. Thomas Crawford, a sculptor from New York, created my body. He learned to shape statues in Rome, Italy, across the Atlantic Ocean. That's where he created me. First, he drew me. He carefully chose everything I held and wore. In my right hand, he put a sword, a symbol of strength. In my left hand, he placed a wreath for victory and a shield for protection. My eagle-feathered headdress honors Native Americans who shared their ideas about freedom with our founding fathers. Then Mr. Crawford made a large model of me in plaster. I was ready to sail to America. Off to sea went the ship carrying me. The voyage was stormy. Crackle, bang, boom. Wild waves attacked the vessel. We almost tipped over, and the ship sprang a leak. To keep from sinking, sailors threw heavy cargo overboard, but not me. We had to make a quick landing on Bermuda Island. After 8 months, a sturdy ship came to take me to my future forever home. Strong workers moved me onto a barge. We sailed up the Potomac River to the foundry in Maryland, where I would finally be cast in bronze metal. When I arrived in the United States, many people were not free. Most African Americans in the southern part of the country were slaves. The North and South were threatening to go to war over slavery and other problems. Philip Reid, the man who did the trickiest part of the job, was himself a slave. He figured out how to carefully craft my body. He melted bronze into liquid to shape me. It glowed red with heat. Casting me in bronze was a big job. While Mr. Reid and others worked on me, the Civil War between the North and the South began. Months later, President Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, but the South did not agree, and the war went on. When I was complete, my full finished size was 19.5 feet tall as a 2-story building. I weighed 15,000 pounds, about the same as 5 big cars. Through windy winter weather of 1863, a steam engine lifted me up with a wire and pulley to get me high on top of the U.S. Capitol dome. Whee, what a ride! I was 300 feet above the ground, standing on a large globe base. Snow landed on my new bronze skin as I looked over the country from atop the Capitol dome. I watched our country enjoy its freedoms, but struggle to keep them. I watched as the Civil War ended and slaves were freed. I watched as women lobbied for their right to vote and won. I watched as people arrived from all over the world to be free. After I was atop the dome for 130 years, my bronze body had turned green. My skin was pitted with holes. One day, a helicopter flew right next to me. It lifted me off my pedestal and gently carried me to the ground. Workers cleaned and repaired me. They filled my holes and made me shine again. People gathered on a bright, clear fall day for a special ceremony to celebrate me. The president and members of Congress gave speeches about freedom. Rita Dove, the first African-American U.S. poet laureate, read a poem that she wrote about me called Lady Freedom Among Us. Everyone sang, God bless America. Then I was lifted back onto the dome. I stood strong and proud, sparkling in the sunshine. The crowds waved flags, and the people were proud of their country. I have watched over the United States of America for more than 150 years now. Visitors still come to see me in Washington, D.C. In the summer, I am warmed by the sun and their smiles. Lightning rods protect me from thunderstorms. Birds perch on my head and shoulders. Someday, when you travel to Washington, D.C., visit the U.S. Capitol. Look up. You will see me atop the dome, between earth and sky. I am a symbol at the heart of the nation. I am Lady Freedom. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I call this story of the Statue of Freedom both a history and a mystery. Now, I'd like to tell you a very personal aspect of the story. In 1993, the statue actually communicated with me. She told me she wanted to be seen by the people she represents. Now, others have also heard her voice. I'm not the only one. In the 1980s, she spoke to a Hawaiian kahuna woman, a medicine woman, named Morna Simeone. Morna helped to get the original plaster statue reconstructed and placed prominently in the Capitol, now the Capitol Visitor Center. She also got the Hawaii State Senate and House to recognize the significance of the Statue of Freedom as a symbol of world peace and freedom. Also, Morna called the statue the consciousness of the nation, and that really inspired me. I believe that at this time, the Statue of Freedom is more relevant than ever before. It is her time to be seen. Thank you for listening.
Hey, Kelsey, I don't think our listeners know about the new upcoming project that we're working on.
Which one?
The video series.
Oh, the video series. That's awesome.
I know. So I thought we could tell them a little bit about what the project is, how it's funded, and what the purpose is.
Well, we are producing a video series, 25 episodes on U.S. history, 25 episodes on world history. And the point of these is to provide teachers who don't know women's history with like a 10-minute video that they could play for their class. So say you're teaching a lesson on the American Revolution. Here's 10 minutes about women in that time period.
Amazing.
And it could be a foundation that you can springboard from and do something really cool on those women.
And these videos are, yes, you, but they are fully scripted. You can look at the scripts. They're nicely edited with some really great content.
Yep. They're vetted by historians, 2 PhDs, at least in history. So, you know, people smarter than me.
But they're going to be free, and they're on YouTube.
And they'll be on YouTube. They also have a comedian from Hollywood who is helping to make them funny. So it's, you know, because I'm like kind of boring.
No, very funny. But that's awesome. So they're really engaging and they're really cool content. So more to come there. So we have those coming out. And those are funded through grants? Through our patrons.
Okay. So their, you know, contributions to us through Patreon are supporting that project. And then we also have a lot of people that have been donating through Instagram, Facebook. We have a Venmo account. You can find us there.
That's awesome.
And they're making those contributions. So yeah, it's an amazing thing. And if this is something that you're like, yes, that's what teachers need, every penny helps because it is a really expensive project. So
Yeah, totally. And we had a match donor for a while there too, which is really cool. So definitely if you're interested in those, feel free to donate. You can donate right on our website, Instagram, and Venmo.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. Great work. I'm excited to see the rest of those videos.
Oh, Brooke, thanks for your support of the project.
Awesome.
Katya Miller, thank you so much for sharing this information with me and us. This is so interesting. I have been to the Capitol so many times and never noticed this. So thank you. I've learned a lot.
Yeah, well, that's the point, is that people go to the Capitol all the time and they never see her or they don't look up to see her. And she's bronze, she's dark, so she kind of gets lost.
So thank you for having me and being interested in the story.
Oh, it's so fascinating. Well, one thing when I was listening to you that I was curious about is this statue. First of all, is beautiful, and second of all, is she modeled after a real person, or is it sort of a vision of people, or an idea of people, maybe inspired by,
Well, I'm only going to talk about her face because each part of her has a whole history. Her eagle headdress has one whole story. Her robe has another story. Her instruments, they're each stories unto themselves. But I will talk about her face being possibly portrayed from a real person. So in my long research, I found an article from, I think, about the 1930s, where it said that they were wondering if the Statue of Freedom was modeled off of a real woman, a Roman woman. And Crawford was living in Rome. So that was, a good guess. But in truth, he married Louisa Ward, who was Julia Ward Howe's sister, and they lived in New York, and he married her in 1844. And after he married her, he carved a beautiful, delicate porcelain portrait bust of his bride. And she's got roses and beautiful flowers around. But if you look at her face next to the Statue of Freedom, I would say there's definitely a relationship there, even though he probably carved it in 1845 or 6, and he carved the statue in like 1855. So, but he looked at her every day, so that would make sense that she would have been a model of sorts.
That absolutely makes sense. That's fascinating. So, you talked about how this statue goes up during the Civil War period, and I know that the Washington Monument is also like starting to be built during that time, and DC is just transforming. So I'm curious about that context. And were there formal ceremonies? Was this a big deal, or was it sort of subtly put up as a symbol of freedom?
Well, let me give you a little context there. It was in the middle of the Civil War, and Lincoln was determined that the work would go on, but of course they didn't have a lot of money to put into it because all the money was going into war. But he wanted it to be there as a symbol for strength and continuity, and that the Union would go on. But actually, that day, that was 2 weeks after his Gettysburg Address, and he was sick with what they called variolode. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but that was a mild case of smallpox. He wouldn't have been there. His right-hand man, B.B. French, who was a master mason, was not even invited that day. And what happened, it was in the middle of winter. It was windy and it was snowy, and the statue went up in 5 parts. So they didn't know when the final part, which would have been her neck and her head and her neck, her shoulders, they didn't know when that would happen. So they couldn't make a big deal out of it. And the Capitol, surrounding the Capitol, was a construction zone. It had metal pieces from the arch of the Capitol, and this unsung hero, Charles Thomas, who did all the iron work, he created grid work for her to go up. And he invented this steam engine and a wire and pulley system. So everything was like rickety, not sure this is going to happen. So they didn't make a big deal out of it. But in the end, when I first started researching, all you hear about is there was a 35-gun salute followed by an answer from 12 forts. And I think the 35-gun salute would have reflected the states in the Union of that time. Oh, and then the architect of the Capitol, Thomas Walters, said, "There will be no speeches or fanfare," because he didn't want to make a big deal out of it, because it was in the middle of the Civil War, and it represented unification, and the country was not unified.
Yeah. So, wow. That's so fascinating. No fanfare.
No fanfare. Can I read to you this amazing speech the year before? You just image the grounds of the Capitol being just a mess, and soldiers, Union soldiers, were camping out there. They were also camping inside the Capitol and using it as a hospital. It was a mess. So here's Vermont Senator Solomon Foote, March 1862. He was the inspector of construction. He says, "If this work is ever to be done, it cannot be done too quickly. And if it ever is going to be done, it ought to be done right now. It has already been neglected quite too long, Mr. President. This national capital of ours, in its present condition, instead of being the boast and pride of the country, instead of being an ornament and credit to the country, stands today, after 12 years, an unfinished, unsightly pile, at once a testimony and a confession, a humiliating confession to our country and the world of a national weakness and imbecility, of national impoverishment, of bankruptcy, which for the credit of my country, when the rebellion shall have been suppressed, as suppressed it soon shall be, when this war shall have been terminated as soon it will be, and when this union of ours shall have been restored, as restored it soon shall be, it will furnish a fitting and appropriate occasion to celebrate that welcome event by crowning the American capital with the statue of the Goddess of Freedom."
Wow. Just out of curiosity, what year was that speech?
1862, March.
Oh, so many years of war still ahead of him, and he had no idea.
Yeah, it didn't go up till wintertime of 1863.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But soon it shall be over, which I guess soon is relative. Yeah. Wow, that's
soon. COVID will be over.
In theory. Oh my gosh. Well, so it's interesting to me because you're reading this speech from this man who is passionate about, furnishing the Capitol with this, this topper. And I'm struck that men and women regularly use women's bodies as these symbols of American ideals. And I'm curious why you think that is. Like, why are women, I'm thinking Lady Liberty off the top of my head, Manifest Destiny, Lady Justice. And, here we have Lady Freedom. Why is it always a woman's body that represents these ideals?
Whoa.
Sorry.
That's the question of the day that we're in process of transforming probably, huh?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a really long tradition that, it has to do with, the patriarchy, living in the patriarchal times. Before the patriarchy, there used to be these little clay figurines that were used for fertility, birthing, all kinds of things. And she was naked, And then over time, all these years, men used that woman as an ideal and a way to kind of separate out I'm projecting because I don't really know what was in their minds. But over time, like Athena was the goddess of wisdom, but then she became the goddess of war. So these ideal statues were used for the agenda of the patriarchy. Mm. And they became bigger and more clothing. They would be clothed and more elaborate headpieces and what they would wear.
I love that phrasing, though. Used for the agenda of the patriarchy. Yeah. And sometimes, let's be honest, women welcomed the being used as those symbols, right, and the idealism behind womanhood, because it is beautiful.
Well, we're always looking for some way to be seen we're beautiful and smart and inspiring. So we're always looking for a way to show that off. Mm. So we'll take whatever, but really now these are the times when we can speak out.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I love about this topic and what you're bringing to the table here for everybody is that this is you're designing a book that's for younger students in particular, so that they can be aware of this statue. And so I love the idea that possibly an educator could take your work and research on Lady Freedom, maybe even contrast this statue with other statues that are out there that do that same thing, use women as these symbols. I think about the building of the assembling of Lady Liberty, a gift to the United States from France in the Industrial Revolution, and the similar, just process of funding and erecting, this statue, but also the similarity, even though these women are different. Lady Liberty is, there's less Native American influence and more French influence in her, what she visually looks like. They're both symbols, and they're both women, and they're both, powerfully positioned. And I think there's a lot to analyze there that students could do. So I love this.
Well, I'd like to speak to something you spoke about in one of your previous podcasts, which is the material culture. Mm. Isn't that a word you used? Something like that? Yeah. So we all have in our possession like a ring from our mother or a grandmother or a piece of furniture, and those all have the memory of those people. Mm-hmm. And that's how, like a wedding dress of some president's wife. And, it's like you tune into it and you kind of get a feeling for what her life was like. Mm. So this statue has been a witness to everything that's gone on at the Capitol since the middle of the Civil War. Yeah. And previous, which is a whole other story that I won't get into now. But that's where I'd love for people to connect with, is the history that if she was a real woman, she would, have that history. But in her bronze body, she does hold that history, that memory, the memory bank. Like I spoke about Morna Simeone, who was a woman who tuned into the statue before I did and had the original plaster reconstructed. Mm-hmm. So she called the statue the memory bank of the country. So through the statue, we can remember our past as a country and then tune in and hopefully envision a future based on the past. But let's create a future that includes women's voices and women's way of being in the world. How about that?
I could not agree more. Katya, thank you so much for coming on our podcast, for sharing this history with us. I am so grateful to you. And congratulations on your fellowship. What wonderful, to fund this work. Congratulations.
It was an honor. Yes. It gave me 2 months at the Capitol to go in depth, where I found more material than I could have imagined.
Oh, I believe it. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts to bring more voices to the conversation. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time.